Yeah, I mean, yeah. What's up? The proposition is, well, I guess it's moral anti-realism is true, but I'm defending a specific form. But I guess all that's needed is that moral anti-realism is true.
Yeah, as he said, the big proposition is whether anti-realism is true. He would be defending a view called the sophisticated expressivism being true. So he's arguing for the F, and I'm against the view that this position is justifiably true. And I'm pretty sure that neither me nor Erik would have to go into like our accounts of evidence because, as we've discussed yesterday, we both have the same account of evidence. So let's get things rolling.
Yeah. You want me to kick things off?
Of course, man.
All right. I mean, so firstly, I just want to thank everybody that's here. I'm just very glad that we have all these, friendly faces and happy people who are just willing to step in here and have a nice, discussion, or listen to a nice discussion, namely. So yeah, I guess what I'm doing here is I'm defending a view called sophisticated expressivism and metaethics. It's defended by somebody named Michael Lynch, and it's basically a view of expressivism that is modified, that kind of gets around, generally speaking, certain criticisms of expressivism, which have been offered in the past, specifically embedding problems and whatnot. But first, it's important as a preliminary to start talking about theories of truth, because this account employs a particular theory of truth, which people might disagree with or people might find controversial. But yeah, so it's defending a view about truth that's called alethic functionalism. With respect to alethic functionalism, it's just the view that truth is a higher order property, meaning that the property of being true is having the property of having a property that plays the truth role. The truth role, specifically, to give an analysis of that, is a semantic and syntactic rule concerning, and it might also be epistemic, concerning, if something is false and it's true, that, we ought to believe in the truth, for instance. So, yeah, truth has some of these rules that are had, and with respect to different domains, there's different low-order properties which might realize this higher-order property. So in the same sort of way that a physicalist, for instance, might think that mental states are multiply realizable, a sophisticated expressivist or an alethic functionalist about truth specifically will also think that truth is multiply realizable. So for instance, in the mathematical domain, what might make certain mathematical sentences true is not correspondence to reality, but it might be coherence with some set of axioms, it might be theoremhood, it might be various different things like that. With respect to the scientific domain, what makes these sentences true is their correspondence to the natural world, for instance. And in the moral domain, what makes moral sentences true is their concordance. And namely, concordance is the satisfaction with the following three conditions. The first condition is that the given moral sentence S supercoheres with some framework F. The second condition is that the sentence P supercoheres with F isn't merely made true just by its supercoherence with F. And the third condition, if I recall correctly, has to do with the moral sentences kind of possessing coherence throughout each and every stage of discourse successively. And yeah, I have an argument for the view. I'll just drop the argument right now. Hold on. And then yeah, we can get your thoughts on the argument.
Do you want me to respond to what you've said this for or no?
Yeah, you can respond.
Yeah, so I don't have any disagreements with the truth theory going under. Well, I guess given the multiple visibility aspect of the truth theory going under, which is just to say that like the truth of a proposition is going to be determined based off certain background criteria. And so for mathematical sentences, for example, even if we're to be like a mathematical nominalist and there's no actual thing out there the mathematical sentence is corresponding with, it would still be the case that these propositions are still true in virtue of certain mathematical axioms. And even if, for example, you're talking about, like, for example, Santa Claus has a shorter hair than Rapunzel, even though neither of these beings exist in reality, it is still the case that this proposition is true, dependent on certain fictional context. And so in that sense, you could actually argue and say that, yes, truth is in fact multiply realizable, and that corresponds with our intuitions about truths in like majority of like context in conversations. Now, I would like to ask you a clarifying question, and you can give the argument at the same time. Are you saying that sophisticated expressivism being true is like a synthetic fact or like an analytic fact?
Yeah, so the truth of sophisticated expressivism is a synthetic fact because it's posited as giving some account of folk discourse practices concerning morality. So absolutely, it's widely characterized as a synthetic proposition. And just to be clear, I've actually delivered a formal argument which establishes this synthetic proposition. And just to be incredibly clear, even more clear for every single friendly face that's come by in the audience, here's the formal argument. premise 1 is if some theory T best accounts for our discourse practices in some domain D compared to some competing hypotheses, then null is equal T is more probable than those competing hypotheses. Premise 2 is that sophisticated expressivism best accounts for our discourse practices in the moral domain, and the conclusion is that sophisticated expressivism is more probable. I have formal arguments for both of those premises, and I have sub-arguments for those the premises of the arguments for the premises. So yeah, I mean, we can traverse the propositional Rolodex, but
Okay, so when you say that like something best accounts for something else, what do you mean there? Are you just saying that given certain laid out exponential virtues on the table, this exponent is the thing which best explains the exponendum available?
Yeah, I'm saying that when a theory to be the best explanation of some given piece of data is just to say that that theory, whilst simultaneously explaining that piece of data, does it simultaneously A, more theoretically virtuous, and B, not violating basic principles of ontological economy.
What's gonna be... You can hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, good. So like you're appealing to theoretical virtues essentially, and I guess like seems as if you're also appealing to like some ontological virtue, or ontological parsimony. I'm not sure if you mentioned that's in the last part of your sentence, but since you're making like a mathematical claim essentially, when you're going to be invoking like probability notion, you're going to say that like if something best accounts for some given thing X, insofar as it maps onto, or rather it is more exponentially and theoretically virtuous than some other given like opposing hypothesis. How do you argue that there is some connection between that or that specific criteria, that's specific epistemological criteria, sorry, and what you'd call probability? How do you argue this?
Wait, I'm not making a probabilistic argument. I'm making an inference of the best explanation style argument. Do you understand the distinction between the two?
You said specifically in the first premise that if some theory T best accounts for discourse practices in some domain D compared to competing hypotheses, then all is equal, T is more probable. So you're basically
giving an abductive argument for being more probable.
Hold on. Yeah, I'm saying that like you're basically drawing the connection between theoretical virtues and the probability, and I'm saying that what's going to be the argument as to why.
First of all, you stuttered, and second of all, if you want the argument that firstly, you stuttered. Secondly, if you want to understand why it is that theoretical virtues make some hypothesis more probable, I actually have a mathematical explanation of this. And what I'm going to do, since you're like questioning something very basic that I wouldn't imagine that any person questions, since what I'm appealing to is simplicity, so I'm appealing to the hypothesis being the best explanation because simultaneously it has more explanatory power and it's more simple. All I need to show, just to be clear, is just that simplicity, or at least ontological economy, is something that is important when considering the probabilities of these hypotheses. So you can just look in the side chat. Here's the explanation. Go ahead.
What the kind
do you take issue? Wait, just calm down for a second. Do you take issue with any part of the explanation whatsoever in the chat? Yeah, just go ahead and read through, buddy.
Parsimony you're going under.
What account of parsimony? All I mean by parsimony, if you're confused on what determines, like you're confused on another basic thing, what it means for some hypothesis. Wait, just calm down for a second. You're the one interrupting. So what it means? You're spreading the fuck out. Just calm down, Apollo. Holy shit. So what it means? So what it means for a hypothesis to be more parsimonious is just while simultaneously having equal explanatory power or having some degree of explanatory power, it's also simpler. So for some hypothesis H to be more parsimonious than some hypothesis H1, it's just to say that H and H1 explain the data equally, and one hypothesis is simpler than the other, or it's to say the inverse of that, or it's to say that one hypothesis possesses both. That's the relevant thing.
So by simpler, what the kind of simplicity you're going under? Is it like a statistical?
Yeah, I'm talking about I'm talking about ontological simplicity and numerical simplicity, but the more relevant type of simplicity is ontological simplicity.
Which is probability reason.
Yeah, I already gave the explanation in chat concerning why exactly you would take simplicity concerns seriously. I've derived them for very basic rules of probability theory. Yeah, I just gave a very basic probability theory.
You understand
you want me to read it out for you?
Ontological parsimony and statistical parsimony?
Wait, do you think that what I'm offering is statistical parsimony? That's the explanation I offered?
I'm not saying what you're offering is statistical.
I'm just talking about the amount of ontological posits in a hypothesis. Presumably, when you're adding extra ontological posits into a hypothesis, that's being added to some conjunction. And if you're adding it to some conjunction and both the conjuncts don't have some probability of like 1 or 0, or every single atom in the conjunction has some probability of 1 and 0, then the probability of the totality of the conjunction will be less than the probability of the individual conjunct. So that's why obviously it would be important taking into account ontological parsimony when considering these hypotheses. No, I think it was very, very clear. Wait, no, are you talking about a ramble fest when you just fall flat on your face on this point like a retard?
How did it fall flat when you quite literally failed?
Yeah, because you made a very basic error. I explained very, very easily why you made the error, and then you said it spurred the fuck out, and now you want to move on because I just embarrassed you on the spot. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so moderation, please. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, you could talk enough, Alan. And then, yeah.
Okay, yeah, cool. So, anyways, this guy keeps on repeatedly appealing to ontological parsimony, and given the conventional definition of ontological parsimony, as any actual intelligent individual should be aware of, is just to simply say that something is more ontologically parsimonious if and only if it does not, or that theory specifically does not involve any commitment towards like some inflation of ontology, i.e., that theory does not require the postulation of more entities than the other theory that is being compared with. And so I don't see any reason to believe that a theory which postulates less entities, for example, or less objects within the landscape is automatically more probable than the other theory, because for any proposition, for any existential proposition within a theory which is postulated next to be something which exists, right? The opposing theory, which would be postulating the non-existence of X, would be affirming a negative existential proposition. And so for any positive existential proposition X within theory A, you'd have a negative existential proposition, which would be like, for example, like not A in theory B, for example. And so I see no reason as to why it would be the case that given like how we actually calculate the probability raising nature of parsimony, it would be the case that you could say theory B, for example, which is going to be the type of thing which does not posit as much entities, would be postulated in less independent propositions to tease all the data in the information set.
Yeah, so just to be clear, this is the guy talking about Ramblefest. What I'm going to do is explain how he got blown the fuck out on that point, and then afterwards I'm going to move on to the other dumb fuck things that he said. But just to be clear, he asked why ontological simplicity or ontological complexity would be relevant to the probability of a given hypothesis. I gave a mathematical explanation of that, and very simply, if you don't understand probability theory very much, when you have an ontological postulate, you can think of those in terms of propositions. And when you tack another proposition onto your hypothesis, that'll lower its probability, assuming that that proposition is part of some conjunction, and the probability of the atom of that conjunction is not 0 or 1, nor are any of the other atoms. But yeah, I'm going to give the mathematical proof, and I hope that every single person here is going to listen to this complete fucking stomping. So, just to be clear, the probability of B given A, and I'm just reading out what I wrote in chat, by the way, since you have the inability to read it for yourself, the probability of B given A equals the probability of A and B divided by the probability of A. A consequence of this is that the probability of A and B is equivalent to the probability of A times the probability of B given A. So you can see that the probability of the conjunction A and B is going to be less than or equal then to the probability of A. And if you want to understand an even more basic point about mathematics, if the probability of A and the probability of B are non-zero and they're non-1, then if you multiply them with one another, then the probability is going to be lower. So if you have some more complicated hypothesis where we have more propositions tacked onto that hypothesis, it's going to end up lowering its probability under ordinary circumstances, just like the exact circumstances that we're in right now. Holy shit, I'm sorry, I thought you were supposed to be the king of debating, but you just turned out to be a fucking jester, okay? This is an incredibly rough day to be an Apollo fan. But yeah, hopefully we can see him like attempt to bloviate whilst trying to explain how the very basic probability theoretic analysis I gave of simplicity is somehow incorrect, but holy shit, this is bad.
My turn?
Yeah, you have my permission to speak,
Okay,
Howard.
cool. So anyways, I guess the intellectually handicapped retard failed to actually understand that what he just gave as an explanation or evidence, whatever the fuck you want to call that, for the reason as to why ontological parsimony is probability raising actually favors the reason as to why ontological parsimony does not necessarily raise the probability of a given hypothesis. So for example, if we have theory A, for example, which is postulated, let's say like 10 entities to explain the data, right? And so for every proposition which is asserting the existence of a given entity, would be like considering that to be like a positive existential proposition. And so like let's say like theory A posits like 10 entities, that would mean that there are like at least 10 positive existential propositions to explain the data. And so for theory B, for example, you'd have like that theory which is denying all of those entities existent, right? That would posit like 10 negative existential propositions, which corresponds with the positive existential propositions for the 10 hypotheses. And so let's say, for example, like these 10 propositions for both individual theories, for example, are all the propositions which attempts to explain away the data, right? And so for every independent proposition that theory A has and theory B has, all else being equal, let's say, for example, the only thing which distinguishes these two theories is ontological simplicity, right? And the both have the same explanatory power and unification, whatever explanatory virtue you're going to be appealing to the conversation, right? It would be the case that they would have the same level of probability. So let's say, like, for any proposition, which in theory A, for example, there's a 0.99 chance of it being correct, right? And so because there are 10 propositions in theory A, the probability of that being correct would be, like, for example, like 0.9. And the same would apply to theory B, because theory B is asserting the same amount of propositions, the same amounts of independent proposition, irrespective of it actually positing less entities to explain the data. And so just because something is postulated less objects to explain the data does not actually establish that it is automatically postulated less independent propositions, which is the type of thing we multiply to actually calculate the overall probability of a given theory. And so you do not actually establish that there is actually a necessary connection between ontological parsimony and probability, but rather you established that statistical parsimony, which is not what you're fucking appealing to, by the way, you dumb fuck retard, is the type of thing which is probability conducive. And so your kind of probability and the evidence you gave to support your kind of probability or parsimonies are being probability reason is the type of thing which actually goes against your kind of parsimony being probability reason to begin with.
Yeah, so notice how Apollo is stumbling through the sentences and being incredibly unclear. What I'm about to say is very highly clear. I never made the claim that if some hypothesis is simpler than some other hypothesis, that alone is sufficient to make it more probable. The claim that I made that every single person here who's a competent English speaker could understand is that if we hold explanatory power constant, then the simpler theory will be more probable. I actually defined parsimony conjunctively with respect to it containing not only just facts about simplicity, but also facts about explanatory power. I know you have the inability to track these very, very basic points that I'm making, despite the fact that I'm so incredibly clear, unlike you, and that I'm so incredibly concise, unlike you, and that I'm so incredibly succinct, unlike you when I speak. But this is a really, really, really bad look. And just to repeat the point that I'm making, because I'm hoping, I'm fucking praying, okay, just to be clear, that Apollo isn't actually denying this very basic and very simple proposition that I'm about to say, which is as follows. Some hypothesis, right, if we have two hypotheses, and those two hypotheses have equal explanatory power, but this simpler hypothesis is more probable. There's not a single person who will actually disagree with some with some theory like that, with some account of simplicity and parsimony and its relevance to probability as that sort of claim. Every person will agree that if we have two theories and we're making some probability comparison, that the theory that's simpler when they have the same exact explanatory power is more probable. And there's a really easy Bayesian way you can show this too, okay? If you talk about Bayesian probabilities and we don't want to make some abductive argument for the theory being more probable, let's imagine that we have the prior probability of some hypothesis and we have the conditional probability of some hypothesis. Obviously, something that we take into account when we're saying on the prior probability of some hypothesis is its simplicity. If we have some hypothesis that's, for instance, incredibly complicated, we're going to set incredibly low price for it. And conversely, if we have some simpler hypothesis, we're not going to set prices that are as low for it. So, yeah, just to be incredibly clear, if we have two hypotheses and both of them have equal prior probabilities, like setting everything else constant, that they have different prior probabilities. So, for instance, it might be that one hypothesis has a lower prior probability for being like far more complex than some other hypothesis, and they both explain the data equally. The hypothesis that has the higher probability fucking trivially is going to be more probable. But Apollo is denying this. Right now, what he expects you to do is to take what he says seriously. What Apollo's expecting you to do is to not understand very, very basic philosophy and to fall in some pitfall where he's being skeptical of something, and it seems like he's justifiably being skeptical of something. That's incredibly obvious that every single person who like knows basic probability theory and that just sets their prize in terms of simplicity, which is basically everyone, by the way, basically everyone sets their prize in terms of ontological simplicity, would recognize as incredibly fucking stupid. Yeah, I'm gonna hand it off back to the retard. You're gonna see more blow reading, you're gonna see more prevaricating, and you're gonna see another clear and succinct response from me.
It's just so hilarious how the retard claimed that I was stumbling, then proceeds to like stumble over the last parts of his explanation in response to my actual counter arguments, or rather skeptical objection towards the presuppositions he was making. Now, to respond to the point about like the priors argument, when he's talking about how we would set low priors towards more complicated hypotheses, that might be true under a subjective Bayesianist model, but not under an objectivist Bayesianist model. So if you're taking like an objectivist account of Bayesianism, for example, whereas the priors are going to be determined by principle of indifference instead of maximum entropy, then it will not be the case that under that specific account, whereas the principle that is utilized to actually, you could say, analyze the prior probability of a given hypothesis would be something which is indicative or emblematic of that specific proposition being
I guess, less likely under the prior probability analysis, irrespective of its complication. Number two, I'm not disagreeing with the idea that parsimony is actually the type of thing which is probability racing. What I'm disagreeing with here is that ontological parsimony, the one that you claim, you dumb fucking retard, to have a specific connection, mathematical connection with probability, is the type of thing which is necessarily probability racing. And I've given the perfect example to espouse that claim when I gave the two theories, for example, or theory A, for example, which asserts, like, for example, like 10 positive existential propositions. And so what that would mean for the audience, for any positive existential proposition, there's an object which is being postulated to exist in reality, right? And so if those propositions, those independent propositions, are utilized to explain the data, right? And theory B, for example, which do not posit any of these objects to exist and instead posit the negation of these things to explain the data, if we have these two competing hypotheses, for example, irrespective of theory B, right, postulating less objects in its ontological framework to explain the data, it would still be the fucking case that, all else being equal, these two views would be just as parsimonious, because guess what? They both assert the same amount of independent propositions, right, to explain the data. And so if we, for example, ascribe the error probability rates of 0.01, right, to like any independent proposition for both theories, you would get that both theories have like a probability rate of 0.99 for every single independent proposition. And so when you multiply that, right, for both theories, you get like a 0.9 chance. And so both theories, irrespective of one postulated less entities or objects than the other one, is still going to be just as parsimonious and just as likely, assuming that the explanatory power is the exact same. And for one, I don't even know what's going to be the argument for why explanatory power is the type of thing which is probability racing. I mean, I take it to be the case that neither of these like two virtues you're appealing to, it necessarily leads to probability. Like, for example, look at like the standard model of particle physics, right? It is unable to explain dark matter. And so I can always generate like some fucking hypothesis called the dark matter man hypothesis, which could possibly or actually fully explain the existence of dark matter. And so just because that hypothesis has more explanatory power, quote unquote, insofar as it is able to generate a causal explanation for dark matter and its existence and why it functions in the way it does not actually indicate or is emblematic of that theory intrinsically be more likely, just in virtue of it actually having a higher degree of explanatory power. So as I've demonstrated within my explanation, without postulating like what he feels the need to actually do in this conversation, because he's so unconfident and so insecure in his lack of substance and intelligence in this conversation, what I've just demonstrated a while ago is that neither explanatory power nor ontological parsimony is the type of thing which actually raises the probability. And you talk about like simple probability theory and like philosophy, when those are obviously topics that you don't really know that much about. According to simple probability theory, by the way, and the theories are, I guess, accounts of probability, which actually talks and proves that parsimony is probability racing, i.e. archaic information theory, it is not the case that ontological parsimony is factored into that fucking theory. And so archaic information theory is what is called the MDL principle, and the MDL principle is predicated on statistical parsimony and not fucking ontological parsimony. Hopefully I don't get another intellectually handicapped response from the dumb fuck Erik in this conversation.
Notice how the Apollo dumb fuck ends up talking about posturing and then immediately after decides to poison the well right before my reply. Holy fucking shit. This is actually hilarious. So, just to be clear, Apollo says to this issue he wants to apply an objective Bayesian analysis and give a uniform prior distribution between moral realism and anti-realism. That's completely fucking hilarious. Nobody ever in any of these contexts whatsoever, especially in philosophy, wants to use some objective Bayesian analysis and apply a uniform prior distribution to both of the theories. Holy fucking shit. And just to be clear, if you're not fine with taking into account simplicity into your hypothesis, or into setting your priors, and you just want to apply indifference, you'd be indifferent, for instance, between the hypothesis that the fact that you're on this call is explained by you clicking on it, and that the fact that you're on this call is explained by 50,000 demons fucking manipulating you, over-determining causally you being on this call, you fucking idiot. Both of those theories simultaneously have explanatory power over the relevant piece of data, but obviously one is less probable than the other. This is like really fucking basic stuff. Obviously, a realist view, a more complicated realist view, would have a lower prior probability, the same exact way that the demon theory that I just explained would have a far lower prior probability. And, yeah, I mean, it's just really, really low-level stuff here. And a really hilarious thing that Apollo said is that explanatory power isn't probability raising. It's just trivial that explanatory power is probability raising. It's just trivial that if there's some piece of evidence that obtains given some hypothesis, that's some piece of evidence for the hypothesis. It can be evidence for multiple hypotheses. The evidential superrelation, just like truth on my view, is multiple complete realizable, but that isn't relevant at all, right? Obviously, it's trivial that if some theory predicts some piece of data, that theory explains some piece of data, then that piece of data counts as, and that piece of data obtains, just to be clear, that piece of data is some evidence for the theory. And just to be clear, the reason that you use so many filler words during your rambles is because you have nothing of substance to say, right? How arrogant do you have to be to come up here attempting to utilize rhetorical tactics after not engaging with anything that I said substantively, and just to make all of these substantive face plants? It's really fucking terrible. The very basic 3 points that you made that I addressed all simultaneously come together into this tapestry and show that you're incredibly confused on this issue. In fact, there's so many layers of confusion I have to cut through in order to finally make it incredibly clear that what you're saying is incredibly fucking stupid and belies fundamental ignorance about probability theory. Whenever you speak, when you go on these rambles, you genuinely sound like you're on horse tranquilizer, okay? If you need me to argue on your behalf, I easily can, but I think that when you're giving these like dog shit arguments and when you're making these basic confusions about probability theory, it works way better when you're talking to random anime debaters in a call with like 2 other people. Holy fucking shit. This is a really rough day for you. I'm trying to explain these basic concepts to a lesser creature, and all we get in response are these infinite, unending rambles, these unskippable cutscenes where he denies basic truths about probability theory or applies completely different analyses that are irrelevant to the issues. You want to apply a uniform prior distribution in this context? Are you insane? Are you retarded? Holy fuck. And all these reductions, all these counterexamples to his theories, I bet that none of them are going to be addressed. I bet that every single time I keep on continually bringing them up, as he keeps on rambling over and over again, it's not being addressed. And I bet that even though I've described in depth, right, line by line, sentence by sentence, how everything that you said is retarded, you're going to continue to ignore my explanations. We're going to get another ramble, we're going to get more lies, we're going to get more dishonesty, and we're going to get more misused rhetorical tactics that you haphazardly stumble through in your dumb fuck dog shit sentences. But it's done. It's over, Apollo. You've made these errors. You could have asked for further arguments. You could have tried to point out issues, and I could have just given more arguments, and maybe you just kept you could have just keep on asking me over and over again to give more and more arguments, and maybe eventually I might have run out of them or something like that. But no, you didn't decide to do that. You decided to give your own positive criticism of one of these premises, which was complete fucking dog shit, and ended up face planting as a result. Holy shit.
Yo, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. So 95% of what this, which is rhetoric. Now, he made the claim that I would not respond to any of the counterexamples, the dog shit, dog water counterexamples he's given. I'm just going to do this right now.
Wait, you're cutting out. I think you're so dog shit to sending even your fucking internet to someone here.
Of 1,000 and you're interrupting me. Oh, shit, he's scared right now. Holy shit, they're panicking.
No, what's cutting out?
To respond to the demon theory hypothesis, and you're doing the same thing right now. So anyways, to respond to the demon theory hypothesis or the counterexample you've given on the table, one could say that it is the case that is more likely, given the fact that the intuitions we have is the type of thing which would not actually favor the demon theory hypothesis. And it's not just the case that the intuitions alone is going to be probability reason, but if we actually factor in the intuitions into the actual data, it would be the case that given that intuition, one view is going to be more parsimonious than the other view, because generally speaking, given like facts about evolution and given facts about like neuroscience and so forth, intuitions are generally accurate. Facts about intuitive physics, facts about neuroscience, facts about evolution would establish the inductive case for intuitions being accurate, generally speaking. And so a theory which is more intuitive is going to be more parsimonious given the frequency of intuitions being accurate. And so it would be the case that given the empty principle, that theory would actually have like a shorter description length, and so it is more parsimonious. So that's like an objectivist approach towards demonstrating. It would be the case that the demon theory hypothesis is less likely, I should say, irrespective of your, I guess, intellectually diminished perspective of probability theory. Now, you saying it's just trivial isn't an argument, by the way. I know this is through the entirety of your word explanation and objections towards the accurate objections I've given towards your dog shit argument. You keep on going on a ramble fest about, well, nobody uses this the way you do, and nobody thinks this is actually the case, and this is just trivial. Well, okay, who cares? I mean, if you're going to say that it is trivial, then that's going to need an argument. I mean, like, saying that something is trivial is not something which is a evidential qualification for a given statement. I mean, I can say that it is just trivial, that ontological parsimony is not the type of thing which raises the probability of an argument or a given proposition, but that would be an argument, would it be? So, yeah, saying that it is just trivial is not going to be the type of thing which actually hide the evidential deficiency behind your position. That's number one. And you've yet to actually respond to the examples I've given about the two competing hypotheses case, whereas one theory actually postulates 10 more fucking objects than the other theory, and irrespective of that being the case, they're both equally just as fucking likely, given the fact that for any positive existential proposition that the first theory asserts, which is going to be 10 independent propositions, the other theory, which asserts the non-existence of those objects, would be asserting independent propositions with a negative, which are negative existentials. And so if we just equally distribute the probability across all 20 propositions in both opposing theories, it would both calculate and come up to the same exact amount of probability, irrespective of one being far more ontologically parsimonious than the other one. Ontological parsimony is not even something which is agreed upon by mathematicians to be the type of thing which is probability raising. And the actual account of mathematics in probability theory, which is archaic information theory, or the algorithmic account of probability, which actually justifies being probability raising, does not actually talk about ontological parsimony. In fact, it is something which is emblematic of statistical parsimony. And so, for one, initially when I even asked you the question, which is if you know the fucking distinction between statistical parsimony and ontological parsimony, you actually dodged the fucking question because you lack the fucking knowledge, the intelligence, and the fucking, I guess, IQ to actually track the fucking question, even properly respond to the question. That's number one. And number two, the explanation you're given to justify parsimony being probability raising is the type of thing which justifies statistical parsimony being probability raising, and not ontological parsimony being probability raising. So just to clarify for the audience before he gives his other ramble-fest fucking response to my arguments, I'm not denying or rejecting that parsimony is probability raising or it raises the likelihood of some given theory or hypothesis. What I'm denying is the specific account of parsimony he's utilizing in this conversation to establish this proposition being true. And most importantly, he has yet to actually give any sort of mathematical evidence for why it would be the case that exponential power is actually the type of thing which is a sufficient condition for a theory being more likely. And they've given an example which actually just debunks that openly. Like, for example, fucking standard model of particle physics. It's not able to explain the matter antimatter symmetry. It's not able to explain dark matter. And I can just generate like some fucking hypothesis called the dark matter man hypothesis, which is able to actually explain all of these stuff. And it would still not be the case that that hypothesis is more likely, given the fucking successful predictions of the former hypothesis in physics. And so it is not the case, for one, that exponential power is able to suffice the indication of something being more likely or something possessing a preponderance of probability. And there are multiple fucking theories in both quantum mechanics and classical physics which lacks exponential power, and it is still the case that these theories are accepted to be true, accepted to be the most likely theory. So exponential power is not this universal objective standard which we ought to go under to like actually establish why something is probabilistically the case. That's not even fucking true. You're trying to like, I guess, get these people into the matrix and agree with this fucking dumbass fucking statement you've just made of the conversation without any evidence to back it up in the conversation. And so I guess that's the only responses I have for now. I guess, or rather, I hope you finally give an objection towards the point given as it pertains to yeah, that's fucking ironic. So anyways, as it pertains to the point regarding the two theories, which is inclusive of one actually certain 10 more entities or objects, while at the same time being just as likely as the other theory, which does not assert as much in the I could say the theory evaluation process. Yeah, give your response.
Yeah, I'm glad that at the end, to go on for longer, you repeated what you had said initially. That's really impressive. But just to be clear, I actually did address the entity case where... Wait, come on, little guy. Just calm down for a second. Yeah, so just to be incredibly clear, hyper fucking clear, just as I've been previously in this conversation, I actually did address the 10 entity case. Maybe you don't remember. Maybe negative existentials, you might take that into account when assessing the probability of a theory, and you might think that being committed to more negative existentials actually lowers the probability of your theory. But that's actually compatible with what I said, because as I've outlined ontological simplicity, which every single person heard, I've outlined it as adding positive existentials into hypothesis, and it's just pretty fucking trivial that if you add positive existentials into your hypothesis, unless they like have some probability of 0 or 1, they'll actually end up lowering the probability of your hypothesis. That's a very incredibly basic fucking point. And furthermore, I didn't say, and what you rambled on for a while too, was about how I said explanatory power is sufficient to raise probability, but I never said, and by the way, the reason you feel the need to cut in at the beginning of what I said, and rather at the end, is because you know I'm building up to beating the fuck out of you and you want to
That was a
stop it
great
before it
argument.
happens. But just to be incredibly clear, I didn't say explanatory power is sufficient to raise probability. That's another basic error on your end. I know you like to make those a lot. I actually said that it's necessary and in conjunction, or actually I didn't even say it's necessary. I didn't even make any claim about whether or not it's necessary and sufficient. That was actually a very, very basic misunderstanding of what I said on your own part. Wait, you failed to track what I said. I just explained how you failed to track what I just said. And now you're trying to cut the fuck in to try to do damage control because you're getting fucking shit on this conversation. You have no clue what's going on. So yeah, you made a false claim, as I just pointed out, when you said that I think that explanatory power is sufficient for a hypothesis being more probable. Nobody fucking thinks that. I think that if some hypothesis has explanatory power and it's simpler than other competing hypotheses, then it's more probable than the other competing hypotheses. And just to be clear, the argument that I'm using isn't using some like objective Bayesian uniform power distribution. Obviously I'm not. And there's no reason to use such an analysis, especially considering the fact that in these sorts of contexts, like for instance, when we're talking about like theism and naturalism, or when we're talking about comparing philosophies of mind in some Bayesian way, we're obviously, and what no philosopher does is they apply some objective Bayesian analysis. By the way, in attempts to respond to the evil demon case I gave, all you said was that the intuitions favor the evil demon case not happening, or whatever, the evil demon hypothesis being false. But that's absolutely like a dogshit fucking response, because I can easily modify the demon hypothesis and I can just build into the hypothesis that it predicts that you have the intuition. So, and for any piece of data that you appeal to, D, I'm just going to say that D is something that's posited by demons, okay? For any piece of evidence that counts against a hypothesis, I can just say it's posited by some demon, and you won't be able to make the move of saying, well, the hypothesis has lower priors, because you already said that you're applying a uniform prior distribution. You would apply indifference between the demon hypothesis and the hypothesis that you just fucking clicked to get here. That's because you're fucking retarded. Holy shit. We are all hearing your confidence actively crash as you cut me off in the middle of what I'm saying when I cut in at the end when it's fucking trailing off. I think that you should get me someone else in here who can actually speak, since your mind can't keep up with how fast you spew retarded shit. You should have gotten someone to sub in for you at halftime. You keep stepping on rakes over and over again, letting them hit you in the face, and all you've done is explain to me the ways in which you've been confused on the matter. I'm not your teacher, and if I were tutoring you, I'd be taking your money for it. Why we don't stick to the topic. You're getting shit on right now. You can't unsay all of the retarded shit that you said. Throughout the entire conversation, it's always going to exist. It's going to be on the internet that you've said all of this retarded shit, and it's going to be fucking permanent. It's true. It's necessarily true. The past is unchangeable. Okay, you said retarded shit that I've replied to, and I've explained why exactly it is that it's retarded, while you've simultaneously been spewing the same exact dog shit responses. There's a reason, by the way, which is look for why when you trail on over and over again, fucking endlessly, going on these rambles that you say nothing new and nothing novel and end up repeating what you said previously, and why when I'm going on after explaining why every single point that you made is stupid and deconstructing your dog shit character, I keep on saying things that are novel. It's because I'm far smarter than you. I'm far more intelligent than you, and you're not able to keep up with me in these discussions. You're getting fucking lapped right now. All you're capable of doing as you're getting lapped is sitting on server mute because you lack the self-control like a fucking dog to not bark as I'm shitting on you in this conversation. You've been fucking curb stomped in this debate.
So I'll repeat it again because you know you're too much of a dumb fuck. Maybe I'll actually break it down for you so you can properly assess the claims that I made. So what I said was that
through the entirety of his response, just pulled a whole bunch of grandstanding tactics without actually presenting any argument for the claims you've been making. Most importantly, the claim regarding the explanatory power part. Initially, you're actually trying to use explanatory power as the type of thing which is probability raising alongside parsimony, more specifically ontological parsimony, to justify the probabilistic inference you're trying to draw on the table. And you kind of like retracted from that. Now you're trying to say it's not a sufficient condition. But anyways, irrespective of that, they've just established successfully that neither ontological parsimony nor explanatory power is going to be probability raising, nor are they both sufficient conditions for something being more likely. In virtue of, explaining and establishing the lack of mathematical connection between explanatory power and ontological parsimony on numerous occasions, with the example I've given. The demon theory example, you can factor in within that hypothesis that it predicts that it would be unintuitive, but then at the same time, the opposing theory, which asserts the non-existence of because the intuitions are the consistency of the accuracy of intuitions is going to be the type of thing which logically implies the probability of that theory being more likely. And so as a result of that, there's going to be some sort of connection between the theory and the intuition data in such a way whereas given the theory being correct, it is expected that it is more likely that it will be more intuitive than for it to be, or rather, it's more likely for it to be intuitive, than for it to not be intuitive, given the fact that there's an inductive relationship between the data and the hypothesis that's being evaluated. And so it is not actually the case that the prediction that you're talking about, that you could factor into the demon theory explanation, is going to be something which sufficiently invalidates and illegitimizes, you could say, the evidence that the opposing theory is going to have in favor of that. And so you could also make the argument that even if both of them predicts that there would be these intuitions, you could say that the prediction in favor of the opposing theory, which actually is going to be a stronger prediction insofar as that would not be an ad hoc hypothesis, whereas the other one is an ad hoc hypothesis. And so as a result of that, the latter one is actually falsifiable. And given the Kaika information theory, theories which are less falsifiable, I should say, are actually theories which are less likely, given the fact that it usually has a longer description length. And so that's going to be a response to your trash response to the example of given. Now, again, I mean, I guess your attempt to prove the claim regarding ontological parsimony being probability reason was you just saying nobody thinks this, it's trivial. I've not heard any actual math which actually establishes emblematic of the conclusion piped on the conclusion you're actually trying to attempt to justify. And so as a result of this, I'd have to say that this is actually disappointing performance on your end. And in fact, you did not even object to the example of given. In fact, you've on numerous times agreed to the example and the validity of the example of given insofar as the connection between that example and your case is concerned. And so you talked about like something or someone possibly having like higher priors towards like negative existentials or something like that. And so that's not even actually responding to the actual point that I made, because given your account of probability and how you actually analyze the probability of a hypothesis, and this is perhaps the only point you've made this far, but sadly you have surface level knowledge on this actual topic, and so it just stops right there insofar as correctness is concerned. But the point you made as it pertains to the usage of the multiplicative axiom or the multiplication axiom to actually calculate the probability of a theory, right? That specific thing, right, is going to be the type of thing which, as I've said on numerous occasions, which you failed to track also on numerous occasions, is going to be something which is suggestive of my conclusion being correct, which is that ontological parsimony is not relevant to the probability nature of a given theory. And so when you stated that how you calculate the probability for hypothesis is based off multiplying the independent propositions of a given, like, or the collection of independent propositions, which is actually, you could say, constitutive of a given theory. When you said that specifically, right, as I've established, that would be compatible with the idea that your view is not actually the type of thing which is probability reason, because in both theories, whereas theory B is not postulating any objects to exist, specifically are those, it's not postulating those objects to exist to explain the data, that theory, right, would be the type of thing which would still be a certain same amount of independent propositions, irrespective of it not asserting the same amount of objects to exist. And so as a result of this, even if the first theory is asserting 10 objects to exist, and so obviously when you're asserting an object to exist, it's called a positive existential proposition, right? For any positive existential proposition that theory asserts, theory would be asserting a negative existential proposition to deny those positive existential propositions to equally explain the data. And so they both have the same amount of independent propositions to which you agreed is the actual determinant factor of probability, right? They're asserting the same amount of these things, which would be the type of thing which determines the probability of a given hypothesis. And so the probability distribution still be the exact same. It will still be the same level, irrespective of one asserting more objects to exist. So given your own reasoning and my reason, of course, it solidifies the idea that the account of parsimony you're going under is not the type of thing which raises probability of some given theory. And so you're talking about the idea that you're going under some subjective base in this model, whereas you're factoring in your prior credences and so forth. Well, that's going to be based off your personal subjective interpretations. I don't grant your credences. I don't have the same credences as you. Someone can be an inflationist about ontology and have higher credences toward is fucking ontology, right? And so you be in a double bind where that's actually explain why your credences is the type of thing which is more epistemically valuable and has more epistemic merit than someone else's credences, which actually goes against your credences. So again, it just appeals to your own fifis at this point. There's no actual real evidence here. And I hope that you're at least not delusional enough to continue with your ramble fest and actually try to act as if I don't know what I'm talking about after you just got schooled at the fucking conversation.
Apollo saying he hopes I don't respond. What a fucking surprise, right? I'm sorry for every single person that just had to listen to that were like actively falling asleep as he was going on his infinite, unending dumb fuck ramble where he repeated the same exact things that I've already addressed a plethora of times. So I'm just gonna skip through them really fucking quick. So just to be clear, the intuitions are predicted on the demon theory. What you said about that didn't address anything that I said. It doesn't matter if our intuitions are mostly accurate. I already clarified why. But, I'll move on. So I never said, by the way, explanatory power is sufficient to raise probabilities non-trivially, i.e. above 50%. Raise probabilities, like even in the dark matter man hypothesis you gave, even on an objective probability analysis, it will raise the probabilities. But on my view, the priors for the dark matter man hypothesis are incredibly fucking low. So that's why the hypothesis isn't probable, or its probability isn't non-trivially raised. When I'm talking about probability raising, there's two senses in which we talk about it. We can talk about it trivially or non-trivially. So for instance, you might think finely tuned constants are probability raising for theism, but you might not think that they're non-trivially probability raising, such that you don't think that there's some strong evidence for theism that would raise it to the probability of it being rational to believe. As for the multiplication axiom and the comments you made about that, it was made for a very, very particular claim, not to prove any broader claim. The specific claim it was used to prove was that if some theory has more ontological postulates, it all else equal lowers its probability. That's obviously fucking true. And that's compatible, by the way, with adding in negative existentials lowering the probability. So that's an incredibly basic fucking point that Apollo also missed. And just to be clear, Apollo can have different credences, and somebody can have different credences that what I have. They can set incredibly high priors for moral realism. It doesn't fucking matter. That's not an interesting criticism. Generally speaking, we have the same sort of rules for assigning priors to a hypothesis, and it might be, for instance, that Apollo has these incredibly non-standard rules for assigning priors to hypotheses, like he assigns indifference to the dark matter man hypothesis, and he just assigns indifference to two hypotheses where one is just obviously wildly less implausible than the competing hypotheses, but nonetheless, the reason he assigns to different probabilities is just because he just likes to have these incredibly interesting credences. But yeah, I think that as for how most people set their credences, and considering how most people evaluate the argument, and how any intelligent they think that if some theory is simpler, ontologically speaking, of course, it's positing less kinds of things, then that's obviously some consideration in favor of that theory, probabilistically speaking. As for the comments that you made in your ramble that sort of trot out when you're trying to think of things to say on the substance, by the way, just pay attention to this. When I say, my points, I always start out with the substance, and then I move to addressing some meta points that Apollo decided to make in this conversation, and the various dumb fuck things that he's done. Whenever Apollo rambles, he says something substantive, goes on a meta ramble, says another substantive thing, and then goes on another meta ramble. Pay attention to the fact that he's intersparsing the dumb fuck things that he says that are like maybe remotely considered substantive with meta comments so that he can think of replies to the things that I say. It's incredibly fucking embarrassing, and nonetheless, he's still getting fucking stomped. You need to realize this, Apollo. Not only are you wrong, but your thought process is wrong. You have a broken brain. I stop you on substance, then you move to narrative building. I stomp you on that, then you move to rhetoric, then you realize that doesn't fucking work. You're getting backed into a corner and you know it. Even you know you're losing right now, and I can tell from your voice that you have zero confidence. Just to be clear, has anyone here seen Apollo this fucking rattled and scared? Is this all he has? He's like one thing what I thought he was. You brought a boxing glove to a fucking gun battle, and you're so lost you're not even fighting on the right field. Every single point that you made has either been a confusion with respect to what I said, or it's been something that's entirely compatible with everything else that I've said. That's why you keep on face planting over and over again, and that's why every single thing that I say addresses what you said in a very clean, very succinct, and very powerful manner. You're getting fucking shit on. You decided to step up here, to step up to the plate, and you struck out over and over and over again. Every single new ramble that you have just betrays another way in which you're fundamentally confused on all of the relevant issues, and just shows how much of a dumb fuck that you are. It just shows how bad you are having these conversations. Yeah, every single substantive point that you made has been responded to. Every single meta point that you've made has been responded to. And not only has all of this happened, but I've made a plethora of different additional points, all of which have gone unaddressed. You've been blown the fuck out in this conversation. Nothing you do, nothing you say, no extra ramble that you go on will rescue you from this dog shit performance. Every single person that's listening to this, that's hearing your loss, that you can't fucking do anything about because you're sitting on mute, and even if you're unmuted, you won't be able to interject because of your dog shit Jamaican Wi-Fi, understands the fact that it's fucking over for you. You've been shit on. You're done. Right. Nothing you can do. I mean, the best thing you can do is ask for healthy reconciliation after getting fucking shot in this conversation. Nothing you say in the next 1/10 will rescue your performance in the previous 9/10. And just because Apollo likes to do what I do, he copies my tactics a lot, which is, you know, how I'll say that. Apollo can go ahead and ramble again. I just want to be very, very clear. Apollo, I want you to go ahead and respond to what I said, but I have a challenge for you. Make sure that what you say is both intelligent and novel. And I bet $1 million fucking that every single thing you say will either be irrelevant, unintelligent, or entirely non-novel, like everything else you said in the past. We've been speaking about induction, and we've been speaking about probabilities. I think it's incredibly obvious that given all of our observations in the past, we can predict that the next thing you're going to say is brain dead and fucking retarded.
Okay, Apollo, you can go now. And let's just try to like keep the points to some new stuff, not like, you know, no repetitions or whatever, because we're gonna go to closing soon. Chat, if you feel as if we said anything new, then address that, and then yeah, you guys can, you know.
Well, I won't be able to hear what Apollo says. Can I have like 1 minute real quick?
Yeah, you're good. Wait, Apollo. He said he's gonna be back in 1 minute.
Okay. Let's.
Alright, that guys, what's up? Sorry, Apollo, for holding you up.
Okay, Apollo, he's back.
Yes. So I was just going to say that really and truly just got rhetorically, intellectually, and substantively like destroyed and eviscerated in this conversation so badly. He's clearly having like an intellectual blackout right now. And as a result of this, he just keeps on going on to like, I guess, the grandstanding tactics, the pathetic posturing tactics in the conversation to evade the actual substance. He said that my points are, I guess some of them are compatible with his interpretation of probability. That's not even true. My points are actually not compatible because of the fact that my points are actually predicated, and I've said this on numerous occasions, is actually predicated on statistical parsimony, not ontological parsimony. And so the only presupposition to make and the only sort of like idea I'm pushing forth here as it pertains to the probabilistic nature of parsimony is the idea that statistical parsimony is the type of thing which determines such and not ontological parsimony. And I've already repeated this on numerous occasions that the explanation and the counter arguments you've given in the type of actually is compatible with my view and is actually incompatible with the proposition you're laying forth in the conversation. I mean, you, I guess, say in your little ramble fest again that nobody intelligent, rational person would agree with me, and like it is the case that like the demon theory explanation is more likely given the plausibility. And I would just ask you this question, which is, why is it the case that the demon theory cannot be more likely given the evidence or given the data in virtue of something which not plausibility or intuition, plausibility related. So like, for example, the reason as to why that theory is more likely is not because it is more plausible or because of some subjective priors we assigned to that specific hypothesis, but it is actually more likely some other alternative be more likely than the opposing theory. And so as a result of this, if you're not saying that it is the case that this thing is impossible, if you're saying that you can actually have some sort of objectivist Bayesianist model, which actually establishes the probability of that given hypothesis, irrespective of prior credences or whatever subjective personal credences or interpretations you're utilizing of the conversation to say that that would be less likely, right? Then it is the case that simply trying to criticize the ridiculousness of me saying that you can apply an objectivist Bayesianist model to establish the likelihood of that hypothesis in itself is ridiculous. No pun intended. To address, I mean, low IQ to me, the IQ dumb fuck agreed that, hold on there a second, still speaking, that explanatory part is not the type of thing which is probability conducive. Like, he then went on to try to justify ontological parsimony. Yeah. What's up?
You cut out first.
What's up, Sonic?
Yeah, you cut out.
It's cutting out the entire time? The entire time?
No, just not even like 5 seconds ago.
Oh, okay. Tell me which part that was. Okay, so I'm just going to repeat the last part. I was just going to say that, like, the explanation is given for why ontological parsimony is actually more, or rather, is going to be probably conducive is actually the type of thing which goes against his position, because he then appeals to the multiplicative axiom of independent propositions. And so that is something which is related to the amount of propositions you assert to tease all the data, and not something related to the amount of entities which are postulated by these propositions to tease the data. And he agreed on numerous occasions that the propositions, the independent propositions that one can use to tease the data, can be negative existential propositions. They can be positive and negative existential propositions. And so nothing about independent propositions necessitates asserting the existence of objects. And so if he agrees that it's the independent propositions and the calculation of such in the multiplicative axiom or the multiplicative manner is what determines the probability of such, then he'd essentially be agreeing that the objects and the existence of objects, or the postulation of the existence of objects, is not relevant to the probability calculation of a given hypothesis and determining whether that thing is actually more likely. I don't think there's anything else I need to address, really. I mean, the whole time through the conversation has been appealed to triviality or something being trivial or uninteresting. I mean, a while ago, his only my objection towards the potential underdetermination of his position regarding the credences point is just by saying it's uninteresting. But that's not actually illegitimizing or disqualifying as a good. And so that in itself is not a good objection. It's not even a good response to my objection. His argument is not a good argument for his primary positions, considering that, number one, the reasons he's given on the table is actually the type of thing which supports statistical parsimony being probability conducive and not ontological parsimony being probability conducive. That's number one. Number two, it is the case that he actually, I guess, agreed that expensive power is not a sufficient condition for probability. And most importantly, has been just asserting that his views are trivially true, which obviously they're not, because usually when you're saying that something is trivially true, we're talking about something which is analytically true. And it's not fucking analytically true that his views on probability is going to be something which is correct as a ontological parsimony. That's not something which is established by some fucking mathematical axiom. It's not true based off the definition of probability that ontological parsimony raises the probability of something or is a sufficient condition for this probabilistic factor he's talking about. So it's not trivially fucking true, right? Because it's not true by definition, it's not true by or conceptual analysis of ontological parsimony and probability respectively. So it's not even trivially true, firstly. That's just his means of prevaricating and dodging and evading from his incapability of actually presenting any intelligent substantive point of the conversation to justify his primary position. And he's just going to go on this little, I guess, schizorambling session, his other episode of fucking madness, where he actually rambles on about how he's blowing the fuck out of me in this conversation and go on his posturing tactics instead of actually respond to the substance, because he knows for a fact that he does not possess the intellectual mental faculty to actually respond to the substance and the points I've given in this conversation. I don't think we need to go over this after he gives his other doctrine response, because obviously his doctrine response is not going to be effective in actually debunking or, I guess, lowering the epistemic merits of my objection in this conversation. That's it.
If you're going to accuse me of rambling and you're going to insult me, make sure you can pronounce your insults the same way a competent English speaker would, dumb fuck. So just to be clear, and just to stroll through the other retarded things that you said, during your unending ramble that every single person had to sit through, like fucking torture, I just want to be very, very clear. I never said that the demon theory is more likely for some reason, which you said at the beginning of your ramble, and I never said that it cannot be more likely. It can be more likely given the evidence. That's not the point that I was making. If the demon hypothesis has lower priors, and both of them equally predict the relevant data, the demon hypothesis and the non-demon hypothesis, then the non-demon hypothesis is obviously more probable. That's very incredibly fucking easy to see. And I mean, I already explained away the confusion with the multiplication axiom. I'll leave that to every single person who is remotely tracking this conversation and has an above 80 IQ that heard what I said in any capacity. And I just want to be clear that the only thing that I said is trivially true, and what I'm committing to being trivially true, is really just that if we set our priors in terms of simplicity, and some theory is less simple will have an equal explanatory power, it's less probable. Obviously, for conducting some objective Bayesian analysis of the probabilities, and we'd assign like a uniform prior distribution, and maybe simplicity doesn't have anything to do with the priors that we decide to hypothesize. We just apply indifference. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that's something that you could do. I'm just saying that that's not the type of analysis that's relevant here. So yeah, I mean, just to be clear, it seems as though your sentences get started, and you have no fucking clue where they're going. It's incredibly fucking bad. I'm sure every person here has taken note of this, that when he begins a sentence, he stutters and stumbles through it over and over again, while speaking at an incredibly boring fucking pace, and simultaneously not conveying anything of content whatsoever. If you are actually paying attention to the substance, which I'm sure a lot of people here have been, you'll notice that he said that same exact thing in like 3 separate ways, multiple different times throughout the duration of his rambles. And then what he does, it's as though he moves to the meta in the middle of his substantive rambles, and then starts to think about, and it's like forgets that he already addressed the thing prior, that he already said something prior, and then out of habit repeats it again. So yeah, Apollo's been fucking stomped in this conversation. He did complete dog shit. It was incredibly embarrassing for him. It's kind of just over for him. So yeah, I mean, we can move to closings. Apollo, what you're saying next can be the closing statement, and then after, obviously I get my closing since I gave the opening. I get the final word. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Like I mean, yeah.
Closing
That was just him.
statement.
Like just clarifying what he was saying.
I don't really
So
know
you
if
guys
that's necessary, but I mean, maybe if Eric did not have an IQ lower than fucking Joe Biden's age, he wouldn't have given these fucking Venezuelan economy level fucking responses to my arguments. But with that being said, I think that the closing statements aren't really necessary. I think he needs the closing statements more because of the fact that he was unable to really give any good objections in the conversation.
I'm actually gonna. No, it's fine. No, that's fine. He doesn't want to give